Tony Beets, a veteran in the gold mining game, found himself confronting a series of challenges that not only tested his skills, but also his ability to adapt to a rapidly changing industry. This season, however, seemed to conspire against him. At every turn, from bureaucratic hurdles to mechanical breakdowns, the once formidable mining empire that Tony had carefully built started slipping through his fingers. His journey from hopeful optimism to crushing disappointment was made even harder by the relentless success of his younger competitor, Parker Schnabel, whose operation was running like a well-oiled machine. The trouble for Tony began with water. License issues at his Indian River claim, the inspectors arrived unexpectedly and informed him that his operation was in danger of being shut down. They identified a significant problem. Tony's equipment and wash plants were outdated, and his water license, specifically his Class 3 license, only allowed him to strip a small area of land. Initially, Tony had planned to mine 15 acres, but now he had to face the reality that he might not even be able to mine a single acre with his current setup. The regulatory issue was a major setback, one that forced him to scale back his ambitious mining operations. The blow to his plans was devastating, and the morale of his team quickly plummeted. Everyone who had been working tirelessly to make this season a success was now watching as their dreams of a prosperous year began to unravel. As if that wasn't enough, Parker Schnabel's mining operation was flourishing. Parker, who was Tony's younger and more dynamic competitor, had embraced newer technologies and modern mining techniques, which allowed his operation to run efficiently and profitably. His crew had high-tech equipment, strategic planning, and a forward-thinking approach that was starting to yield impressive results. Tony, on the other hand, relied on older, more traditional methods, and it showed. The contrast between the two operations was striking, and it must have been a bitter pill for Tony to swallow as he watched Parker's team pull ahead. Parker seemed poised to have the best season of his career, while Tony was fighting to keep his head above water. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The so-called King of the Klondike was now at the mercy of the U.S. government and the harsh realities of outdated gear and poor planning. Amid all the troubles, things took an even worse turn when the Indian River claim began flooding. Just when Tony thought things couldn't get worse, the rising water levels forced his crew to halt everything and focus on pumping out the water before they could continue working. This unexpected setback added more delays to an already struggling operation. The team, already feeling the pressure of the earlier water license issues and equipment failures, was now facing another obstacle that seemed insurmountable. With the season slipping away, it became more and more apparent that Tony's hopes for a major gold payday were slipping through his fingers. Desperate to salvage the season, Tony and his crew scrambled to resubmit paperwork and try to work out a way around the water license issue. However, the paperwork delays only added to the mounting frustrations. The team had to contend with the fact that their biggest wash plant was in dire need of repairs, further slowing their progress. Every step forward seemed to come with another setback. But in the face of these difficulties, Tony and his crew kept fighting. They managed to get the wash plant back up and running, and for a fleeting moment it seemed as if things were finally turning around. However, that moment of optimism was short-lived. The inspectors returned with the harsh reminder that without the proper water license they had no choice but to shut things down again. The crushing reality of the situation hit hard, and the team was left feeling demoralized despite all their efforts. In an effort to keep the operation going, Tony made the difficult decision to move everything to Paradise Hill, a site that had been inactive for a while. It was a tough choice to make, as it required bringing all their equipment to a site that hadn't been mined in years. The idea of reviving Paradise Hill was a daunting challenge, and it would take everything they had to not only get the operation up and running, but also to make it profitable. The stakes were high, and the team knew they couldn't afford to fail. But as they scrambled to make progress, they couldn't help but glance over at Parker's claim, which was operating like a well-organized, efficient machine. Parker's crew was moving forward with speed and precision, while Tony's team was still struggling with old equipment and a series of delays. The biggest issue at Paradise Hill was water management. Without a consistent water supply, the mining operation would collapse, and that was exactly the kind of pressure Tony and his team faced. Despite the constant obstacles, they continued working, doing whatever they could to work around the issues. Slowly but surely, they began to see some results. The gold they were pulling out was far less than they had hoped for, But it was a start. The team was still in the game, and that kept their spirits up. A few hundred ounces a week wasn't ideal, but it meant they hadn't given up completely. Every little bit of gold felt like a small victory in a season filled with major setbacks. Throughout all the difficulties, Tony's reputation as the King of the Klondike was at serious risk. The weight of leadership in such trying circumstances was a heavy burden to bear, but Tony refused to back down. As the season wore on, he and his crew continued to press forward, tackling each new challenge head-on. Despite everything, they managed to pull a small amount of gold from the ground, a fraction of what they had originally hoped for, but still a glimmer of success in a season marred by failure. Each nugget they found was a reminder that they weren't ready to give up yet. In many ways, it became a season of survival rather than triumph, but even the smallest of victories was worth celebrating. As the season drew to a close, it was clear that Tony and his team had fallen short of their grand ambitions. The Indian River claims, once a promising site, never returned to their former glory. Despite all the effort, they failed to reach the 6,000 ounces of gold they had originally targeted. The challenges they faced were simply too great: an aging wash plant, outdated equipment, a severely restricted mining area due to licensing issues, and relentless competition from Parker's well-funded and modern operation. The disappointment was hard to ignore, especially when they saw Parker's success unfold before them. While Tony's team struggled to get by, Parker's crew was pulling in gold at an impressive rate, and it seemed like every investment Parker had made in technology and strategy was paying off. The contrast between the two crews was stark. Parker's team was streamlined, efficient, and consistently productive. His operation was everything Tony's wasn't: modern, well-planned, and running like a well-oiled machine. Watching Parker's success must have been a bitter reminder to Tony of how much things had changed in the Klondike. The mining landscape had evolved, and those who failed to keep up were being left behind. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it became clear that the future of mining in the Klondike belonged to those who embraced innovation and change. For Tony, the lesson was painful but necessary. As winter began to creep in and the season came to an end, Tony and his team faced the harsh truth that their operation, as it stood, could no longer keep up with the demands of modern mining. The breakdowns, malfunctions, and the inability to secure spare parts had taken their toll. Morale was at an all-time low, and the crew was physically and mentally exhausted. But despite all these challenges, they didn't give up. The team kept working, focused on salvaging what they could from the last weeks of the season. They knew that they couldn't afford to make the same mistakes next year. They had to figure out how to evolve and adapt, or risk falling further behind. The contrast between the two crews was more than just about equipment. It was about leadership. While Parker's team thrived on innovation, Tony's crew struggled with outdated methods and a lack of adaptability. The difference in leadership was evident, but both teams were pushing hard to make the most of the season's final weeks. The reality was that Parker's team was already looking ahead to the next season, fine-tuning their operation for even greater success. Meanwhile, Tony's team was focused on making sure they didn't repeat the mistakes of this season. The season ended with Tony licking his wounds, while Parker expanded his empire. But this wasn't the end for Tony. To maintain his title as the King of the Klondike, Tony knew he needed to make some serious changes. He had to innovate, improve his operation, and fight harder than ever before. The Klondike was a ruthless environment, and nothing was guaranteed. Everyone in the business was chasing the same dream of striking it rich, and only those who could adapt would thrive. Tony and his crew needed to pull themselves together, face the challenges ahead, and prepare for the next season. The Klondike had changed, and Tony would have to evolve with it if he hoped to remain at the top.